Hello, welcome back to another episode of the FGLI podcast. In this episode, we have a nuanced discussion about imposter syndrome with Dr. Dustin Brisson, who is a biology professor and the director of the Biology Master's Program at the University of Pennsylvania. Dr. Brisson walks us through his own experience navigating college and post-grad and the feeling of not belonging or doing enough. He offers guidance on how to combat these feelings and how to take control over one's own path. Hello, welcome back to the next episode of the FGLI podcast. Today, your hosts are Peter and Will, and we are joined today by Dr. Brisson. So, hi, Dr. Brisson. How are you doing?
Doing well, thank you. How are you?
Awesome. Before we begin, do you want to do a quick introduction, just for people who don't know you?
Be happy to. My name is Dustin Brisson, or Brisson, if you would like to be French about it. I am a professor in the biology department. I primarily study the ecology and evolution of infectious pathogens.
Awesome. So we'll go into a little bit more about your background, kind of how you, your FGLI journey, how you navigated everything from college to then grad school, etc. But before we dive into all of that, we have a quick icebreaker for today. Right. Very random. So if you were a snack, if you could be a snack in another life, which snack would you be?
So that's a really interesting question.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And
why? That's a really interesting question. Okay, so I might have more than one answer for this. So one answer would be something on the order of, I don't know, like black licorice flavored horrid candy. Now the reason for that is very specific. Nobody likes it.
No.
Not that I like to be disliked, but then chances are good that I'm going to be passed around over and over again, and I get to travel and see a whole bunch of things. So I've chosen a snack, not that I would choose to eat, but that you would choose to not eat, but to give to your friend, who'd give to another friend, and then I get to see a bunch of things.
Okay.
That's a very nuanced response. I never would have, because I'm sure there's multiple people that love black licorice, but it's not a snack that comes to immediately to mind.
Yeah,
but,
exactly.
Your approach to it was really interesting. Yeah.
You would end up in a place where you're really wanted.
Yeah.
Probably so, indeed. Yeah, there's going to be a couple of people who really care. Yeah. Which actually is interesting, follows a bit of my personality. I tend to have a small number of close friends, and then a wide net of acquaintances.
That's good. Yeah. What was the other snack that you wanted to be?
Well, so the other options would be, they might have have some similarities. So it might be something on the order of a fruit salad. Again, it has it comes from a whole bunch of different areas.
Yeah.
I don't feel like I play one role in the world. I play many roles in the world, and just the concept of a mix of things basically allows me for that kind of diversity, which I enjoy.
Awesome. What snack would you be, Will?
What snack would I be? Well, to stay true to my roots, there's this candy that I grew up on. It's called nuanced, and it's essentially this creamy, think Nutella, but it's a little bit thicker, and it's pink, white, and brown. It's 3 flavors, and you eat it with this little spoon that it comes with, and it's just it has a little dinosaur on the packaging, and it just that's just so nostalgic of a snack that I ate as a kid, and I feel it's 3 different flavors, and I feel I have levels to my personality, so I feel that's the perfect candy that embodies not only my culture but me as a person.
Oh,
How about you, Peter?
Wait, I was thinking about this the other day, or not thinking about it as in terms of a snack, but just back when I was a child, we would eat pieces of bread, but then dipped in hazelnut coffee creamer.
Ooh.
And then I don't know who started it, but I remember my dad always would toast a baguette, and then he would have these little dishes. He would pour some coffee, specifically hazelnut coffee creamer from Delight or whatever brand it is, and then that one tasted the specific one. So we would break off little pieces, dip it in,
eat it. I don't know why it would be that snack, but it was like very nostalgic because I was like, you know, like the little like coffee creamer like tin or like plastic things. I like poured some and I was like, oh, there's some left. Let me like drink a little, and then it like hit me again, like the nostalgia from like back then.
Yeah, it's a very, I don't know. That's like there's like a lot of like overlap here because it's a very Latino thing in my culture too eat like pan dulce, so sweet bread, and you dip it in coffee, and you would eat it. Yeah, right. So it's just like really interesting that you mentioned this.
Yeah. Also interesting, Peter, because you mentioned baguette specifically, not white bread, which I'm assuming also has some cultural roots as well for your family. Being a French colony.
French.
I would think so. I now want to participate in the nostalgia, although my nostalgia is not quite as cultural as your guys's. I don't. So I'd like to participate in this nostalgia snack as well, because I do quite like this. So mine is definitely not very cultural. I don't know where this would come from, but when I was a kid, the sort of this desired snack, and we couldn't do it very often, was cinnamon toast. It's very specific. So it was white bread, very American thing to do from the 80s. Toasted white bread, butter, and just sprinkled on cinnamon and sugar. And
that sounds good.
Oh, it's very good.
Sounds delicious, like cinnamon roll.
Horrible. Oh. And so good. Right? I just introduced it to my daughter. I didn't want to introduce it to her when she was quite young. She's 12 now. And it's definitely got passed on. It is the snack of choice whenever we want to indulge.
Yeah, a little guilty pleasure.
But every time it comes up, it brings me back to 6-year-old me, and it's so good.
Oh. Nice. I'll have to try that someday. Oh yeah. I have like some cinnamon. Wait, it's super simple. Cinnamon, butter, sugar.
Yeah. Cinnamon, toast
bread. Toasted.
That's the way we did it. You can do it as you please, but you toast some bread, spread the butter on it, and it melts, and then you sprinkle sugar and cinnamon, and you get little even almost puddles of wet of butter.
Do you toast it after to like caramelize the sugar?
I don't. That's a good idea.
That's
a really good idea.
Come on, go to Ramsey.
46 years old, and now I'm gonna try that.
Awesome. So I guess after these snack recommendations, we can move on to more of your Figly journey. If you want to talk a little bit about what it was like to first go to college, and then you mentioned a little bit about when we talked previously about your trip to Central America, and then after that, what made you decide to go to grad school and then now become a professor?
Right. These are all good questions, and it's kind of long, so you might have to keep me a little bit on track as I venture around. Right. Yeah. So, my Figly journey into college was, I would say, a very rough transition. So I went to a perfectly decent high school, but certainly not a prep school. A public high school in California. Plenty of kids went to college from that school. Also, plenty didn't go. My parents, obviously, as a first generation, didn't go to college, and so they couldn't help navigate, once I got to college, any of the basic questions, and that's really where things fell apart for me. I didn't feel that I was necessarily underprepared academically. I also didn't go to Penn. I went to I would say a less, it's not an Ivy League school anyway. And the school was very generous. They were very helpful in many ways. But the big problem was if you don't know what questions to ask, there's no way to know what you don't know. And I have several kind of silly examples of just things that kids whose parents went to college understood that I didn't understand, and I couldn't figure out because I didn't know how to ask the question. And I'll just give you one example of that. Was trying to register for classes. In high school, every class was every day. And so I just assumed that any class that I took would also be every day. And so I was looking through the catalog. This was in the 90s, so it was all on paper. And I was looking, and I just couldn't make a schedule because the classes kept overlapping. I didn't know what to do. It never occurred to me that every class wouldn't be every day. And so I never asked that question. And I just couldn't and it was very frustrating until you actually show up, until it actually, you go to class and you then realize that it's not every day, but everyone else knew that. I simply didn't know how to ask that question. You don't know what you don't know. You can't ask, what don't I know? So I would say that was the biggest challenge of going to college, is there are just so many things that I didn't know, and I had no one to really ask, and also didn't even know how to ask the right questions.
Kind of side tangent, branching right off of that. The experience of kind of like registering for your classes and then realizing that, like, making this mistake, you didn't know that every class wasn't every day, but then you didn't know to ask. What were your feelings like during that? Because I feel like looking at my experiences like that are similar, like I didn't know like this certain thing, but then looking back in hindsight, like I kind of like bash myself. I'm like, why didn't I know this? It could have been so easy just to like ask someone to like do all of that. But then at the same time, I do give myself grace, because I'm like, I genuinely didn't know, and I can't really like blame myself for that. So I'm curious, like what kind of like feeling, it is like a certain like specific situation, but I'm curious what your thoughts were and feelings were like after you found out.
Yeah, that's interesting. I'm actually very impressed with your thought process in this now, looking back at yourself. And I'm not sure that I did what you're doing. I certainly didn't do that while I was in college, really do what is called metacognition, thinking about your thoughts, thinking about why you think the thoughts that you have. So I think my best answer to that is I didn't really think about it, but I did feel about it. I had a generalized kind of conceptual idea, and that generalized conceptual idea was that I didn't belong. I didn't understand the same things that other people understood. There's no way that I was going to be able to do this successfully, and that also caused problems. I did not choose to do certain things because I was afraid of being exposed for truly not belonging. But those same things probably also would have helped me figure out the directions that I could have gone. So I basically hid from my own thoughts, I think, and just felt bad about it.
I find myself relating a lot to, especially what you just said, like feeling bad about it. I think, like Peter said, I try to give myself some grace, just because sometimes you don't know these are questions that you could even ask, or that you didn't even know these questions could even exist, really, because especially at an institution like this, there are resources that are so specific to instances and situations for you, but you will never find out about those situations unless you find someone else that has gone through the same exact things like you. And I find myself like relaying information to, I guess, like some of my own mentees, just because they have these questions that are like very niche and they've kept to themselves. But then I realized, I had the same exact question when I was in their position, and it's all about passing on information that most people don't have access to, or just didn't even really know existed. And so I guess to segue into it, how would you say you approach finding these resources when you were navigating in the dark?
So that's a really good question. And my answer is going to be, I think, very normal, but also unfortunate. I was lucky. This is how I feel about it. Luck comes in a variety of forms. The way I see luck is doors that open for you. You still have to walk through those doors. You have to put in the effort to make something of those opportunities. But the opportunities themselves, to a large degree, I didn't plan. I just got lucky. So there are two major avenues where I got lucky. Both of them have to do with individual professors. So Dr. Karen Martin and Dr. Lee Katz. Dr. Karen Martin she's a biologist at Pepperdine, where I went to college, and she gave me a job. It was a work-study job to help her with the lab part of her class. And she was incredibly generous with her time in guiding me. I don't know that she had planned it that way. I don't know that that's the way she saw it, but for me, she was a person that very quickly gained my trust, that I could ask questions to, that I felt I can ask questions to, that were dumb questions. they say there are no dumb questions, and that's true to a degree, but they certainly feel dumb. And she was there. And Dr. Lee Katz was quite similar. He also gave me a job, but this particular one was for research. And so I got into his research group in my sophomore year. And that was a real catapult. I don't think I would have had that opportunity had it not been for Dr. Martin, though.
I find like a lot of the resources that I found were, luckily because I was a Penn PFP student, so I did the pre-freshman year program, I immediately got connected with a counselor who luckily also went to this institution and was first-gen low income. And basically, it took a while for me to break out of my shell, especially with dealing with, I guess, the imposter syndrome of it all. And Dr. Emmanuel Martinez was my counselor, and he would just pass on just incredible opportunities for me. And I see that in your bio, you mentioned that you also offer like one-on-one mentoring. And so I wanted to ask, what was your thought process for going through this route to help students like?
Yeah, to be honest, you just answered the reason why. It is simply the exact same. I had the same experience that you had. There, of course, well, now there are offices for first-gen students. When I was in college, there weren't. But even though that there are offices for, that specialize in issues that first-generation students have, they still aren't the same kind of one-on-one understanding. It's still programmatic. So I can push you towards from that programmatic side. You can push students towards things, but that's not the same as knowing what they don't know. You only get that by having small group discussions, one-on-one or small group discussions. And so that's the exact reason why I like to do these small group or one-on-one meetings. Typically, they do happen with the more science-oriented students because those are the students that are around. But I do try to make it as open and clear as possible that those students can come and ask me questions in these sorts of ways. And I explain the kinds of stories that I have. I couldn't figure out what MWF and what TTH meant on that book because I just never thought that those could mean anything. I never associated them with days of the week because obviously every class is every day. I've spent the last 13 years in school. That's how it works. Why would it be different now? And so I just never registered that. There's no way to programmatically know what each person's deficiencies are, their knowledge deficiencies are, this gap, without actually talking to them. And to a large degree, gaining trust. That doesn't happen with the program, that happens with a person.
In terms of more of the specific questions, it's always you just kind of like diffusion. You just work your way through, and then somehow you randomly bump into the right thing. But whether by trial or error.
Yes.
Yeah.
No, that's 100% true. I totally agree with you, Peter. The important thing though, and this is the two parts of luck, right? Opportunities, you don't control that. If the door is locked, the door is locked. You don't get to walk through it. Fine. But did you walk up to the door? Did you put in the effort? Are you still moving around? And this is something that I do see amongst first-generation students quite often, is that it becomes overwhelming and they just stop kind of reaching out at all. And that becomes a real problem. They're so, to be honest, it falls, generally speaking, into the shame category. It's a little bit beyond embarrassed. It's sort of shameful, and that's problematic. If you feel shame around the fact that you don't know things, you won't ask any questions. You don't want anyone to know that you don't know things.
Right.
You have to keep moving. You have to keep trying, and there's risk involved.
And I think a lot of that stems from the identity of being first-gen low income, just because I know with the struggles that come with being a first-generation limited income student, a lot of the reason as to why you end up in the institutions is because you put in the work yourself, and you had to deal with a lot of these things individually. And so breaking out of that shell and asking these questions can be very hard. I found myself finding help in general just so very difficult, especially here at Penn. I've always been someone who's very transparent. I try to talk to people and see where I can get the help I need. But when it came to academics, or when it came to anything regarding Penn in general, it was really hard to want to go find these resources. And so I know you have written a book regarding these experiences, and I wanted you to maybe talk a little bit about like why you decided to approach the book in the way you did.
Yeah, it's a really interesting and sort of weird story that goes along with it, and it follows along with a lot of our conversation that we've had already. So I have taught in entry-level biology the whole time that I've been here. So since 2007, I've been teaching at the entry level, so mostly freshmen. And I'm not sure if it's a set of statements, a vibe, just the way that I look. I'm not totally sure, but a lot of students do come to my office to talk about general college issues. They're not always first-gen students, but very often, I'd say not more often than not, but certainly more often than the population of the class would suggest. To be fair, they would usually come to my office to say they want to talk about biology. So I'm teaching a class, they say there's this topic in biology, I'd like to come talk about it with you. So they would come to my office, and within really a very short amount of time, it became very clear that was not at all what they needed to talk about. And so for years, I had, those sort of composition books, the black ones with the grids, and I would just write down their problems, the things that they're talking about, try to give them solutions as best as I could, and then I would go do some research into psychology or philosophy to try to get better answers. So this happened, for years, and then COVID hit, and I should back up real fast. So I realized actually pretty quickly that for the most part, the problems that students would come to me with, there weren't that many. Like they had little different flavors. Each student had their own sort of angle on it. Right. But a lot of times they were the same sets of issues. And so I had these composition books, and a student would come to me with a problem. I'm like, oh, I know that one. I have that problem. We've dealt with this before. But it was in these, one of 12 composition books. And right. I don't have the kind of memory that would know where all of these things are. So it was awkward to have them sit in my office across from me. And I'm like, wait a second while I flip through all of these books, right? And so during COVID, I decided as my COVID project, that I would take those composition books and I'd put them on a computer so I can search them more easily. And then I sort of realized that, there's just not that many questions. So I sort of was organizing them into different files. And then I realized, well, if I would just kind of write this out in better English, not just notes for myself, then when people came to me, we could talk, but I could also hand them something that I'd already written. And then the final step that made it into something that looks like a book is, well, if I write it in proper English, like with periods and commas and such, then I could staple all those things together, these different files I have, and now they're chapters in a book. So it really was quite organic, the way that it came about, from the sets of problems to organizing those sets of problems and solutions to a big staple.
What was your kind of motivation to start writing all of these problems in your composition notebooks, and then after that going the further step to look into the philosophy and the psychology behind it?
Yeah, so those are two questions, I think, and they're both good questions. So the writing one's a little bit easier. I am just a visual person and a tactile person, so I will write stuff just generally. I'm always writing stuff down. So that part is just sort of the way that I learn, the way that I remember things. The going and looking into the psychology, the philosophy, that one's a little bit more interesting, a little bit more dynamic. I've always been, I shouldn't say always, since college I've been interested in philosophy and psychology in general. I actually had considered majoring in psychology even. I just sort of like it. I like thinking about how people think. I took actually a really great course called Great Books, and there was a lot of philosophy in there, and I enjoyed it. As I've gotten older, I've gotten more interested in practical philosophy. So these would be things like Stoicism, Epicureanism, and even parts of religions like Buddhism, which is a religion, of course, and it has the religious aspect, but it also has a lot of really practical philosophy in it. So I've read those things somewhat independent of these problems also. So I know that there are solutions. These are effectively the way people think problems, right? So there are solutions in philosophies and in psychology to deal with those things. So I know that that existed, but I'm not an expert. So doing the right sets of reading, sort of directed reading, again, this is not academic philosophy, but understanding the practical philosophy is something that I can do. It's something that, in fact, we can all do. You just have to know where to look. Right. And to a large degree, this book is a set of summaries of these practical philosophies as I understand them. I know there are others. These are just the ones that that work. One other thing I'd like to say about this book is I believe there are 16 sort of topics in there. There were others that students brought. The reason these 16 are in there are because these are also the 16 that I struggled with. When I was in college, these are things that had a major impact, a major negative impact, I would say, on my own college experience. So to a large degree, I didn't write this book for you. I wrote it for 19-year-old me. Like, a lot of these things, they apply to hopefully other people too, but the person that I was writing it for was frankly a very scared young man who felt horribly out of place and needed this guidance.
I find myself relating a lot, especially with the topics that are mentioned in the book, especially about living authentically. Especially at an institution like Penn that's very pre-professional, I find myself getting lost in a lot of the jargon, especially with internships, when people are talking about corporate and everything. I find myself feeling like I'm behind, and there's this very common notion of Penn face on this campus, and I can't help but let it get to me, or I feel like that's a very common experience faced by a lot of first-gen low-income students. And I guess I wanted to ask if you could talk about your experiences with Penn face or imposter syndrome and how you overcame it.
Yeah, those are good questions. So obviously Penn face specifically, like, I don't interact with as much because I'm not a student, so I don't have the same interaction with this. But of course it happened on Pepperdine's campus as well.
Pepperdine
in fact,
face.
I guess it's Pepperdine face. That's a weird way to say that. Actually, a colleague here, Errol Akjai, has written a very nice paper. I believe it's up on bioRxiv at this point, on this exact topic. And it's on the Penn face topic, although he was a Stanford, he went to Stanford for graduate school. And they have something too, I believe it's called floating duck, or something like that. So the words he uses not Penn face as much, but more the Stanford terms.
Less catchy.
I think it's floating duck, yeah, although I don't fully remember. But overall, the imposter syndrome is still something that's quite, it's quite prevalent in these. So your question was, what was my experience with imposter syndrome, and how did I get over it? My experience with imposter syndrome is, existed in college, it existed in graduate school, it existed as a young professor, and it exists today, as I've been here since, again, 2007. And I still have, not constantly certainly, but it comes up periodically. They're going to figure it out soon that I don't actually belong here, and they're going to take it away. 46 years old, and it still exists. So I'll answer your last question first. I have not gotten over it. Is it possible to get over? Probably. I have not. I think a lot of people have not. There's actually a very good book that I read somewhat recently, although I don't remember exactly how long ago it was, that is called The Secret Thoughts of Successful Women. And I just saw there was an update to it, so it's called The Secret Thoughts of Successful Women and Men, I believe. It's not really woman-specific, this book, although a lot of the examples are from women. Women tend to suffer from imposter syndrome more than men. But nevertheless, it's a good book if you want to read it ever. So my direction with imposter syndrome is much more about mitigating the impacts of imposter syndrome than trying to get over or get rid of imposter syndrome. at this point in my life. So my experience in college with imposter syndrome, I would say, was coarse. It was not a very elegant way of dealing with imposter syndrome. There was a lot of hiding of not where I came from. In fact, in some ways, I was a bit proud of that, from coming from, basically my starting line was much further back than other people's.
Right.
So I had some pride in that part of it. But if I didn't know something, I would hide it. I would do everything I could to not let people see that I didn't know how to operate in this space. I can give an example, which is actually a little bit of a backward example because it's not academic, but it still will, I think, shows my mindset about things. There was an opening to play the drums with this group. It was just a little band. It wasn't like a real thing. And I didn't really know how to play the drums, but they had a drum kit. And they're like, well, you can just show up to practice and you can just practice while we're here. And I absolutely would not do that. I'd say, well, I will practice when you're not there, but I will not pick up drumsticks and have you watch me be horrible. And that mindset carried through college. I would watch what other people did, try to figure out what the outcomes were, instead of just asking. I really, really didn't want anyone to know that I didn't know what was going on. In graduate school, it was somewhat similar, but it was better because it's a much smaller group of people, and you tend to work with one person quite closely. So that it was better that way. But I started graduate school at the same time in the same lab with another person who was much, much better prepared. And near the end just after the end of the first semester there, I was considering and almost did drop out of graduate school. I just felt like everyone else knew what was going on and I didn't. They were making progress and I wasn't. And I didn't know how to move forward. And it turns out that they also didn't know what they were doing, but they had effectively Penn face. And I remember talking with the postdoc in my group, the lab group that I was in, because my advisor was incredibly smart, and he would say things and I didn't understand it. And everyone else around the table was nodding like they were following along with no problems, and I was looking around like, I have no idea what's happening, just none. If you guys are all know what you're doing, this other person started at the same time as me, we should be in the same place, and we're clearly not. This is going to be a big problem for me. And so I was talking to the postdoc in the lab, and he said, no, like none of us know what's happening. Like we all just take notes and then go read and figure it out, same as you. But they had the face that was said they knew what was going on, and I had the face of, a deer in headlights. It happens. And when I came here, it actually got much worse before it got better. I came here, I was 26. I was afraid of you. I was afraid of the undergraduates. Mm-hmm. The graduate students were my age or older. Postdocs were older than me. Everyone here all of the other faculty here were super bright. A lot of them are, in national academies or, they're just really top of their game people. And I just really thought they made a mistake. And that lasted for a long time. And it was very damaging, I would say, to even my scientific progress.
Could you go in a little bit into kind of like how it affected your work as well? Because from like initial impressions, I would think that like you were like be too nervous to like do things that were more of like out of the box, etc. Because you wanted to show that you were worthy, if that makes sense. Would that be like an accurate?
It's like, half accurate. So the second half is accurate, that I really wanted to prove my worth. And there was a lot of anxiety, a lot of nervousness. Right. And so part of what happened was being kind of conservative would get you progress, but it wasn't splashy progress. And then, so you would worry about the progress, that the incremental progress that you're making as not being worthy. And then you would just hard swing to the other side of high risk, like let's make a splash. But then progress was slow. And then, crap, like this is not working. And then you swing all the way back to the other side of this incremental, and it would go back and forth. And then you end up not making progress on anything. And then the anxiety goes up. And so it really was a circular, there was a circular problem there. Not making the progress necessary caused more anxiety, which caused me to make even less progress. It affected my teaching as well. Being as nervous as I was about the opinions of the students made my teaching worse, which then made the students think my teaching was worse, which then also cycled there. So yeah, there was a lot of, to a large degree, not knowing what the right way to get this done is. Now, not everybody's parents were academics on the faculty somewhere, but a fair number of the faculty here have at least one parent who is on the faculty somewhere. That's different. That's the same first-gen problem. What are you supposed to do? They know how to move from hired to tenure. I don't know how to move from hired to tenure. And if you ask one of your colleagues, how do you do this? They say, well, just be really good. Like really just make a lot of progress. What does that mean?
Right.
You don't know what you don't know.
And I guess this makes me like wonder, through a lot of these struggles, what was like your biggest motivation to like really push through these like really mentally draining like concepts, like when dealing with like imposter syndrome and like I guess your place in an institution like this, like what was like your biggest motivator to push through these times?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I don't really know the answer. I have to imagine that it also changed through the different times. A lot of it wasn't well thought through. It is, again, a feeling. So imposter syndrome or these types of things, these types of anxieties can push people in a variety of ways, again, to the two extremes. It can push you, and it has at times pushed me to be, well, I'm not doing anything. I am just, like, I just need to hide from this completely, to I need to prove to everybody that I'm the best of the best of the best. And there was this swing back and forth there. That's not really good that's motivation that's caused by the imposter syndrome, not motivation to circumvent or overcome the imposter syndrome. I would say it wasn't until really post-tenure that I started to kind of evaluate what do I actually want in life. And I think that was really the first time I became conscious of my thoughts. And that was also the time when I started to really invest in, again, what I call metacognition. Thinking about my thoughts. Thinking about why I'm making the decisions that I'm making. There's probably 1,000 people who have said something similar, but I like the way that the author Anais Nin said, we don't see the world as it is. We see it as we are. All of our baggage, all of our experiences, they all inform how we see things. Trying to understand as you feel, as you have urges, your thoughts, where do those come from? What are they founded on? Is an incredibly important thing, and it is the advice that I would give to students now. It is what effectively the book is. The book is a workbook for you to explore your own experiences, your own thoughts. It's the advice that I would give myself as a college student. It's the advice that I would give students now. Now, that's a very amorphous set of advice. It would be useful for it to be more specific in specific situations. But the umbrella is you need to think about why you think about the things that you think about.
Yeah. So it's kind of more like like cognitive behavioral therapy in a sense, where you're like trying to change your thought processes and kind of in thinking about like how like imposter syndrome, for example, like affects how you think and how it like affects your feelings, how it affects everything. The goal is to be able to kind of like circumvent that and then be able to kind of like reduce it by just like realizing that it's not like an actual thing that's blocking you, if that's...
Yeah, I think that's pretty accurate. The one thing that I would change about that in practice is that if you make the goal to change, you oftentimes will be frustrated with the progress. If you make the goal to understand, the change will happen. So it's a you see that the small differences, but it actually does change the trajectory and the motivation quite a bit. And there's a bit of a joy in finding the mysteries of your own mind. There's not a lot of ways to get frustrated by this. It happens, and it's a fun experience. If you're constantly evaluating your progress, for most of the time, you're going to be frustrated. So this is kind of a similar topic that happens in college students quite often, which is being very grade focused, being very, I need to study for this exam because I need to do well on this exam, because I need a good grade on this exam so I can get a good grade on this in this course so that I can have a good transcript so I can move to the next thing. This is quite a problematic mindset because the studying for that exam is fraught with frustration. You're constantly evaluating yourself as you're going. The other problem is, in theory, and hopefully in practice for most of us, you're studying something that you like, and therefore you should find some joy in studying the things and learning the things. Well, these two things can be at odds. The grade focus thing will make it so you don't actually enjoy learning the things that you could properly enjoy. You also don't really get any joy out of getting a good grade. It's just a stepping stone. It's not the end goal. It's just a goal that you have to hit to get to the next thing. So you don't even get to stop and celebrate the fact that you got a good grade. And I'm not suggesting that you do stop and celebrate getting a good grade. It's kind of pointless. What I am suggesting is trying to refocus towards learning the material. The byproduct of that will be a good grade. If you know the material, you also have to know how to take exams. Like that, like there's more to it than just knowing the material, and I fully recognize this. But also, knowing the material will allow you to have a joyful experience while understanding, while focusing on the material, while actually doing the studying. You'll have the byproduct of having a good grade. Fantastic. That's effectively the same thing that we're talking about with this progress we're talking about of your own mental cognition, of understanding your own metacognition. If you focus on the change part, you'll keep pointing at the parts that are the problems. This is the next thing I need to do. And your whole mind, your whole view, the view in your mind will be of only the negative things. There's no way around that. But if your goal is to figure out yourself better, well, that's just an adventure. That's just an exploration. That's fantastic. If you're walking in the woods, you get to look at all of the woods and just explore. If your goal is to get somewhere, then you're just going through the woods. They're kind of a nuisance.
And I think a part of like the reason why everybody's journey just can be very chaotic and everything is because people like to place a timeline on themselves.
They do.
And then they like to compare it to other people, and which is something that I found myself doing especially a lot last year as a freshman. But I guess like reframing my mindset, which is something that I really, really have been prioritizing this year, it made me realize everybody's on a different timeline. Like you shouldn't really be comparing yourself to somebody else because they're on their path and you're on your own path, and eventually you're gonna end up where you're gonna end up, and that's where you belong. And I guess the question I want to ask is, what resources have you felt that you benefited greatly in your journey? I guess from high school to now where you are here at the University of Pennsylvania.
I'd say that I haven't gotten out of it. Just like all of the imposter syndrome. It still exists. I still compare myself to others. The difference is now that I recognize it, I catch that thought, and I address the thought specifically. The thought still comes, but it has a smaller impact on my life, my well-being. So it's not about getting rid of it. Well, I mean, that would be fantastic, of course, to get rid of it, but that's not the way that I have addressed it in my own life. I have just prioritized recognizing it when it happens and addressing it. So comparisons amongst people comparisons with your colleagues is horribly problematic. There's multiple reasons that it's problematic. Obviously, it has a devastating effect on you, but it is the same as the Instagram filter. I'm probably using that wrong, but you're not comparing yourself to another person. You're comparing yourself to a filter. Mm-hmm. You don't see all of the struggles that someone else has, but you do see all of your struggles. Further, this is especially true for first generation and low-income students, but it's true for all people. You focus on the negatives. You focus on all of where you think you're deficient. So your worldview is 90% of your time focusing on the negatives, on the hurdles, on the things you have to overcome. And you're focusing only 2% of the hurdles that someone else has to overcome. Mm-hmm. In everyone else's world, you only see the positives. Well, of course, they're doing way better than you in this comparison, because you're not comparing apples to apples. You're comparing apples to dolphins. I mean, it's not. This is just a totally unreasonable thing to compare. But it's all you know, because I'm not going to show you all of my dirty laundry. I'm only going to show the nicer side to you. You see my good side, you see your bad side. So that is problematic. The time is also very interesting, and I would, your comment about people on different time scales or different timelines, that's absolutely true. And I think there's even a little bit more to it than that. It is that people think that they have a timeline to a specific thing. So they think that I want to be, I deal with a lot of people who want to be doctors. I'm in the biology department, so I deal with a lot of people who want to be doctors. And they say, well, I need to be a doctor by, in the next 3 years or 5 years or whatever it happens to be. It's like, well, why do you want to be a doctor? I don't know. I never thought about that before. That seems like something worth thinking about. So it's not only that they set themselves a timeline to a goal, they haven't even necessarily thought about the goal that they're trying to reach, or why they want to reach that goal, I should say. So you're on a different timeline than other people, but even that timeline should be thought of as really quite flexible, because your destination is gonna change, or should change, in my opinion. I think that the idea that we ask students or young people, when they're 19 years old, what are they going to do for the rest of their lives? That's crazy. You've seen almost nothing of the world. Why would I? You have not even, you're 2 semesters into college, and we've just asked you to take 8 total courses. How are you supposed to know what the options are? So I think that's really quite ridiculous, and having a much more flexible timeline, or alternatively, not a timeline, just a direction, an exploration, is a much healthier mindset. Now, obviously, you want to move towards something, you want to make progress, but also reflect. Is the path that I'm on the path that I want to be on? And if you don't mind, I'm going to tell a story about doctor friends, physician friends that I have, who are not necessarily first generation, but I think it illustrates the point of understanding the path, or thinking about the path that you're on. So they're about people that are about my age. They work at the hospital here. And of my friends that I have here, honestly close to 50% of them, again, in their mid-40s, don't want to be doctors. Okay, so why are you a doctor then? Well, because when I was in high school, I was smart, and people said, well, smart kids they're either doctors, lawyers, or engineers. Now for you guys, I'm going to guess there's a fourth one that's like economics or something, right? So, that's what smart kids do. So you, 7-year-old child, which one are you going to choose? And you say, well, I don't know, doctor, I guess. And then from then on, all of the adults in your surroundings keep telling you both that you're smart and, wow, it's so great that you want to be a doctor. And you don't even realize that you didn't make that choice.
It's just operant conditioning at that point.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Exactly, right?
Yeah.
And then once you get to high school, they say, well, if you want to be a doctor, which you do, we've already established that, then you better work really hard, put your head down, and just get really good grades. So you do. And then you go to college, and they say, well, if you want to go to medical school, you need to get really good grades. So put your head down. Don't think about the path. Just think about getting good grades so you can go to medical school. And once you're in medical school, they say, well, if you want a good residency, you have to put your head down and work really hard. So you put your head down and work really hard. Just keep going through all of these steps. And then now you are an established physician somewhere, and you have a second to take a breath and look around, and now you have a house and $400,000 in debt and 2 kids, and you realize, I hate this. This is not at all what I want to be doing. I don't like any part of this. But you have a house and a mortgage, 2 kids, and all your medical school loans, and you really feel like you can't stop now, which I also understand that. So you're just going to say, well, I'm just going to be a doctor then for the exact one life that I had. I had one time to do this, and I'm going to do something that I hate the whole time. And again, I want to emphasize, that's about half of the people that I know that are physicians.
I think it just goes to show this goes back to like living authentically. Like as you just said, like you only have one life to live. And I feel like an experience or like a headspace that goes through a lot of Figley students is trying to make your parents proud. Because frankly, because you're the first generation, you want to make sure that what you pursue in a higher institution of learning is going to amount to something. And sometimes some of the interests that people have may not align with what their parents have or what everybody else is suggesting. And I guess which leads to a lot of these reasons as to like why these people end up in positions where they're like, wow, I've spent like all my life pursuing something that's never been my own interest. And I think that's just like a very Figley thing and not even, it goes beyond that. And it just goes to show how much influence has over one's own mindset.
Absolutely. And I'd like to add one other thing about Figley students, or specifically low-income students, which in this exact same vein that you were talking about. Oftentimes our families sacrifice a lot for us to be able to go to these schools. Mm-hmm. So it's not only about making them proud, it's about recognizing their sacrifice and saying, like, I can't let your sacrifice go to waste.
My story is very similar to what you were saying. All my life, from pretty much elementary school, I think teachers were just like, oh, this kid's got it. Like, he's like I was pretty academically like a gifted is what they called it, like a gifted student. And they kind of just fed into it. They were like, you should be a doctor. And I almost applied to Penn on a pre-med track, but at the very last minute, I dropped out of a pipeline program I was doing at U.S.A. University and decided I wanted to do something that more aligned with my own interests, and that was economics, business. I wanted to end up in like marketing, and I guess making that decision was really, really hard. And I had to like mentally prepare for it because once I told my parents and once I told my family, they all were just like, what happened? Like, it was like a whole thing. And to this day, I kind of just really hope like I can amount to something, just because I do feel like I have so much to repay, just because they've given up so much for me, and I have this like entire generation following afterwards that is kind of like counting on me and looking up to me, just because I am the first one in the family that's gone to college and will hopefully finish college, and it just comes with a lot of like burdens and like a lot of like weight on my shoulders, which makes it a lot harder to not want it to succumb to the traditional routes that Penn make very mainstream, like for example consulting. It's like I can't help it, but that's like an option that's kind of like coming in my head, and I'm just like, at least I know then if I were to enter that area, I would be almost guaranteed some sort of way to pay back for all they've given me.
So I have a question for you, which is, when you had made this decision internally, but you hadn't talked to your parents, did you fear that you were going to disappoint them?
That's always on my mind. I feel like I hold my mom to like the highest regard. She's like the strongest person I know, and disappointing her is the last thing I want to happen. Like it's like I know for a fact that I would be heartbroken if she were to say those words, which she's never really said to me. She's always been like, everything you do makes me proud, and I just want you to be happy. And she emphasizes all of that, but I still struggle with accepting that pursuing my own interests won't lead in her disappointment, because I don't know, it's all about framing and the way how growing up people have just fed this idea into your brain, and now that you're like rejecting it and finally trying to bring out your authentic self, it's really hard to dismiss those feelings and not help but feel like you're gonna disappoint someone.
So sorry for taking the interview in the opposite direction, but these are good. I feel like this is very telling and very common. This is a very common experience. So when you did tell your family, did you interpret the way that they reacted as disappointment?
I would like to say like my family's very like carefree. When I told them, they kind of laughed it off and be like, "Oh, now who's gonna give me my free like surgeries or something?" Yeah, they'd be like, "You were supposed to give me my surgeries." I was like, "Oh, I'm sorry," but I think in the end, they just have seen how much work I've been putting in to get into these spaces, and they know that I know myself best, and I know what I'm doing will end up like being something that I'm meant to be doing, and hopefully once I get there, I can like really like give back and just show them that I did do this for not only myself, but I did it for y'all, for everybody. So that's great, actually, and I think a lot of people who had the experience, a similar experience that you had, where they told their parents that they wanted to change, they wanted to do something else. They feared that they would disappoint them, and then their family had questions. And a lot of students interpret those questions as disappointment. I might encourage you to ask your parents how they felt when you told them. Generally speaking, and not universally, but very often, they're not at all disappointed. They legitimately want what's best for you. And since they didn't go to college, they don't know that many things. They don't know that many avenues to success. They know doctor, they know lawyer, they know engineer. You didn't choose one of those three things. I know, Bill, that you can be successful in life if you're a doctor, a lawyer, an engineer. And you just said you wanted to be a consultant. What is that? Is that going to make you happy? I don't know. My ignorance in this makes me nervous for my offspring, for you. I mean, obviously you're not actually my offspring, but as we're talking here, like that's the role that I'm pretending to play. And so I don't know, so I'm nervous. And so I ask you questions, and then you interpret that as disappointment. But if you actually ask your family, and again, this is not universal. For everyone who's out there who has parents who legitimately would be disappointed, and those definitely exist. I can think of many cases of the family of doctors who are upset at the one offspring who doesn't choose to be a doctor. That absolutely happens, and I'm not trying to say that it doesn't happen. It is nevertheless, in almost all situations, quite useful to just ask the person that you're talking to. Don't try to interpret their feelings. Just ask them. You can ask pointedly,
are you disappointed? But also, you can just ask them to think about their own thoughts. It's a very useful exercise to get things out in the open. Now, to be fair, I've never asked my parents. So, a little bit of courage and maybe a little less hypocrisy would be useful here. But,
yeah, I think this is like a really like interesting topic that a lot of people like struggle with, and I feel like a lot of like the like blanket like advice or information about like navigating this topic is just like, just do what you want to do. Like, it's okay if you don't like, if your parents don't like support you. But I think that definitely like doesn't apply for more of like the Figley experience, because like you said, it's like more nuanced than just like your parents don't want you to do X, but you want to do Y. It's like they made their sacrifice for you. They worked like long hours at like very low wages just to first like support you for like 18 years and then support you like through college. And now, like you said, they're like scared because you're like changing paths. And like I didn't make like as technically like a drastic like change. I was just like, I don't know if I want to be biochem, so I'll just be like neuro. Or I don't know if I want to take like 1 gap year or 2 gap years. And my mom was her initial response was what is this first? Because she only went up to probably like 7th grade or whatever in Vietnam. And then her first response was, what is this? And then her second response was, are you giving up already? She knows like from talking to like other people how long of a road like medical school being a doctor is. And then she's just seeing me like be like, oh, like some like hesitance maybe that she views like taking like 1 versus like 2 gap years. And then her initial response was like, are you giving up? And at first I was like confused because I'm still going to medical school, but then her worry was like, what if like in those 2 years you like decide to go on your own path, veer off, whatever. And like beforehand, like it was the same thing. Like I was told like, oh, you're gonna be a doctor. And then I was like, okay, I'll be a doctor for like up until like high school. And then until now, and it wasn't until probably like junior year when I was like asking myself like questions like why I want to be a doctor, all of that it started to like set in like, oh, I do want to do this, and it's not me like believing in like something else that other people have told me. But when I told my mom that I wanted to take like 2 gap years, maybe like it was just a maybe. She was like, whoa, what is this? Are you changing your career path already? So it was my initial response was like confusion, kind of like maybe like frustration, because I'm still going on that path, but then like taking a step back, being like seeing it from like her perspective as well. And we talked about this during like our interview with Professor Greist, and he was saying how there's like, it's not really like one side knows more, one side knows less. It's like both sides just have like asymmetric information, and it's just like a disconnect between, or lack of information flow between like both sides that kind of like drives like the frustrations and like confusion on like both sides. So I think it's like definitely like a really complex topic that can't really have like a blanket like just do this and then everything will be fine, because every family also has its unique like dynamics as well.
100%. I very much agree with this. I would add one other aspect, I would say, to Dr. Greist's comments, is that the anxieties that people have around decision making still play here. Your mom, I think in this case, didn't have anxieties about your path, about your decision path, because she felt that you had made one. You were going to be a doctor, and now she can sort of put that one, on the back burner. It's not like you are a doctor, but the decisions have been made. That's not going to come up again. And then it came up again. Is my son going to be successful? I thought we had put this to bed. I thought that this was, and now we're bringing this up. That restart of the anxiety around, this future that she kind of thought was already secured, that's a lot for her to deal with. So that's a shock for her. Right. People's anxieties about the unknown, especially for people they care for, can really cloud decision making, and really not uncommon. I mean, incredibly common. And
Right.
we do it too. We do it back the other direction. You have anxieties about your own future. If you don't know what you're going to do from here, you're a sophomore, so you still have time to pick things. What is your actual path? Well, there's some anxiety about that. Part of that anxiety is kind of fun, right? You have all of these paths and all of these adventures. Yeah, that's true. But also part of the anxiety is proper anxiety. Like, is this
Right.
actually going to work? That's a real thing. Your parents have it too.
And I think it also goes back just to comment on what Professor Grice said. This asymmetric information. My parents didn't even. My whole family doesn't really grasp the whole concept of even like Ivy League institutions.
Oh, mine doesn't either.
So it's just very interesting because they're like questioning, oh, like you could go to this school or this school. Why did you choose to go so far away? And I feel like had I not made the decision to at least leave this like little bubble that I had back home, I would have not had made the decision to go into like business or pursue something that I was at least more interested in, because I think there's just so much value in experiencing life, especially college, like a little bit separately from, especially because I know a lot of Figley experiences revolve around like a very strict family. Like breaking that bubble and just like experiencing life on your own really just lets you absorb so many different narratives, perspectives, opportunities. And I think that's what I also really love about this campus, because it's just so there's always something going on, and there's always some way to like take advantage of these opportunities and everything. And I guess to segue into a question is, what advice would you give a student that's just very unsure about what they want to do? Where should they go?
Yeah, I think that student is in a fantastic place. It is the exact place that an 18 to 20-year-old, or even 18 to 25-year-old, in my opinion, should be. This is your life. It's an adventure, and you don't have a timeline. This timeline that you had brought up earlier, it can be really disastrous for your path. In fact, thinking that you need to be somewhere at a specific time, you need to have accomplished some things at a specific time. So, I don't know how to answer your question. As to actually how to complete a path or to find a path per se, that my answer would be to actually to take a step back and to look at all of the paths and really think about why these things are interesting to you, and don't shut anything out. Don't say, this teacher in 4th grade said I was bad at chemistry, so I'm not going to do chemistry. Like, leave that in there. Yeah, think about that. Think about that, 4th grade teacher and how very little they know about who you were then, much less who you are now. But think about it consciously. Try to bring it out. So, as we mentioned earlier, I think through writing. I spend every morning for about 45 minutes just writing. It's not really journaling exactly. It is just getting thoughts onto paper and then seeing them in black and white and saying, okay, where do those thoughts come from? What's driving that? Are those thoughts associated with other feelings, other kind of urges that I don't really know? Are those sort of just because I'm a primate and that's what, that's how I evolved? Is it cultural? Is it cross-cultural? Is it my culture interacting negatively with where I have, or positively too, that happens, of course, where I am now? So really taking the time to think about why you do what you do. And I know we've come back to that theme. You do it how you do it. I do it through writing, but I think it's just a really important thing to do. Don't force it. The short answer to your question is don't force it. You don't need to be anywhere. Take your time and find it. You will be fine.
I think we've been like on the same wavelength this entire interview, because every time I want to like bring something up to like ask you already answer the question. I was gonna bring up I remember how you kept talking about journaling in our previous conversations, and I was like, the same thing. I wanted to ask you about like journaling, how when you're trying to figure out like what you want to be, it's like a complex question. You can't really answer it through one stream of consciousness. Like you'll end up in a circle and just like loop back around, and you'll end up like nowhere. So for me, also journaling or like seeing like it on paper or like arrows everywhere, Venn diagrams, whatever, just having it on paper so I don't end up in like a loop
Yep.
really helps too.
Absolutely. Now, I just want to come back to the idea that, having goals is fantastic. You should definitely do that, but also make sure that they're flexible, right?
Yeah.
So even with journaling, if your point in journaling is to find an answer, you're going to end up being frustrated a lot, and actually the actual journaling part will go less well. If your goal is to figure out things about yourself that you then can apply to this figuring out answers, then I think you'll make proper progress and you'll enjoy the process.
Awesome advice. Before we conclude the interview, we like to ask everyone like a really specific question. So it's, if you could give one piece of advice. I know we've given like a lot of pieces of advice throughout this entire interview, but if you could choose a singular piece of advice, whether it be academic, just life advice in general, that you could give to your younger self, what would it be?
Absolutely, it would be to take a step back and think about why I'm thinking the thoughts that I'm thinking. This is really the umbrella that is the thing that I was missing as a young person. I was always trying to hide my thoughts, even from myself. I felt that the thoughts that a person like me was having are not the kinds of thoughts that the other people, my peers, were having. Those thoughts were shameful. I tried to keep them to the side or out of my mind entirely as best I could. And then I would end up making decisions because those thoughts, while I tried to push them down, I wasn't thinking about them, true, but they were still there. They were causing other thoughts, they were causing other emotions, which would affect decisions that were not the best decisions. If I would have been more conscious of why I was thinking what I was thinking, I could have made better decisions. And importantly, enjoyed the process. So thinking about what you think about, I find it, and it's actually fun. I mean, it's not time consuming, it's fun.
Yeah.
Your heart rate is slower, your breath is better, your shoulders are more relaxed. It's a good time. And you can do it just kind of whenever for even 10 seconds. Like, oh, there's a thought. I wonder where that one came from.
Awesome. So before we conclude, any last words, shout outs, anything?
I mean, shout outs, man, there is so many people that were so influential in my life. From family, from my immediate family, who were incredibly supportive despite really not understanding anything that I was going through. I mean, in fact, just this Christmas, one of my aunts asked me how Penn State was, right? Because Penn State is on television. They have a football team that's on television, and that is how we knew what college was at all. We knew the colleges that had sports teams. That's the point of college, apparently, is to train people to be professional athletes, I guess. I don't know, right? Again, I've been here since 2006, and still they think I work at Penn State, or some people do, right? They don't understand what I do or why I do it, but they're very supportive, and that has been hugely influential in my life. Through some high school teachers, talked to Coach Rod, super useful, just an incredibly beneficial human being in so many people's lives, but certainly mine as well. In college, I already mentioned Dr. Katz and Dr. Martin. They were both fantastic. And in graduate school, my immediate advisor, Dan Dijkhuizen, but also my, we call them lab siblings, the people who are in the lab with me, Dan Stobel, who's a professor now at Harvey Mudd. He was an incredible human that was again, very, very useful, very beneficial in my life. I'd say useful, it sounds like they're tools, no, but they're just like really good human beings who wouldn't even say supported me, just their being was supportive. And, in here as well, and in my current family, not current family, my immediate family, whatever you call that, my core family here, and my friends here. Yeah, I mean, keep your connections with people. Be compassionate to their anxieties and their needs. and they will do the same to you.
Of what you just said about like they may not know entirely what you're doing, but they still support you. I think there's something so beautiful about that, especially with like the Figley experience as well. Just because you're the first person in the family to be going through these experiences, going to college and then pursuing careers that were not necessarily available to them. They may not know everything that you're going through, but just having that support system, I just feel like really reminds you why you're doing what you're doing, and it pushes you that extra step.
Absolutely.
Which, just wanted to comment on that.
Yeah, no, it is really beautiful, and it's really pretty amazing just how much our families have sacrificed for us, obviously financially, with their time and effort, but also emotionally. And they are at a really huge risk. So we were talking about before the show, before we started recording, what our families did. So my family's also in construction, and that's low risk. Most of my cousins went in a similar path, and they're fine. They work, and they've had jobs since they were 18, and going away to college, that's what's supposed to happen. I don't know. So their emotional risk, and they still supported us through that anyway. It is really a beautiful thing.
Yeah. Also, I wanted to comment on that as well. Like when I started to like move on campus at Penn, it was like a whole like family like reunion thing. Like my mom, dad were in the front seat, my two sisters were tagging along, my grandma was also there, my aunt was also tagging along like in the back somewhere. And then like every time they also like visit me like at Penn, they bring like a random like relative. They just like pick up just to kind of like see, because we are like the first people to like go to college, learn all these experiences, and then I think it's really special to be able to share like a piece of it back, just to show like how much we like appreciate their sacrifice as well.
Absolutely. I like that.
You can't help but just feel like you can't help but want to share some of these experiences with them, because it's just something they're never really gonna get the chance to experience. So
it's like going to a different country or a different time in the world or something. Yeah. Indeed.
It's like in a world where you could give that time back to them to experience these things. Like I would give anything for my mom to be able to experience college. Because I just feel like these are experiences that are just so amazing, and like to know that she went through so many struggles to get me here, it's just makes it all the more worth it when she comes here and sees me like achieving things and everything.
Absolutely.
So,
yeah. And then in the same vein of like showing like your mom like everything. Like when my parents like went to Penn, I was like showing them like the different buildings, and then my dad was like looking like so like amazed. He was like, "Whoa, this building looks so cool. This looks so cool." And then we like go up to. I lived in Harrison when I was a freshman, because of COVID, all of that. But then he like went up. He was like, "Whoa, you can see like all of Philly, like West Philly." And then I took him to Commons, the dining hall, and then just seeing him like go around, like it was an okay day for Commons, like in terms of like dining hall food. But he would go around, like sample like everything. He looked super excited, trying out like all the ice cream, stuff like that.
That's really funny.
Yeah.
I did the same. We also took my family. It's a French Canadian Catholic family, so there's a fair number of us. And they would all come to visit, and they would go to the dining hall, and it was this big amazing experience, which is so common for so many people.
Yeah, it was a very special experience. I like recorded all of it too, so we can look back.
Wow.
Yeah, it was like a time lapse of us just eating. It was super nice.
That's fantastic.
Yeah. Thank you again, Dr. Brisson, for joining us today. We really appreciate your time just to walk through your entire journey, all of your advice that you've given. You've given like a lot of like hidden gems, pieces of advice. If there's any way that anyone listening wants to contact you to speak with you, because you have like such good advice, and I feel like you're just like talking one-on-one is super special. How could someone reach out to you?
Yeah, I'm actually very easy to find. You can obviously come to the biology website. I am like the fourth one down because my name starts with a B. And you can email me directly. The one thing that I will say is that we do get 100 or 200 emails a day. So do not give up if you do not get a reply. When we don't reply to people, typically it's because we want to reply, but we need a little bit of time to figure out what to reply. So if you wanted to meet with me, for example, I need to figure out a time in my schedule where that's possible. So I don't respond right away. The problem is with when you get 100 or 200 emails in a day, your email kind of gets lost. So just send it again. People don't not reply to you. Professors don't not reply to you because they don't want to. It's because it just gets lost. So please write to me, and I will reply. It just might take 2 or 3 pokes.
Yeah.
So don't be afraid to do that, which is actually really good general advice for FGLI students. FGLI students are very quick to give up. They'll ask once, or well, most of the time they ask no times. But if they are going to ask, they'll ask once. Then they don't get the exact response that they need, and they're like, well, then it must not be for me. That's just not how it works, and everybody else knows it. Everyone else knows to just keep pushing.
Right.
But FGLI students tend to not know that, and they get lost in that.
Yeah. Wait, that just reminded me of one of my first conversations with you. I think I was talking about just I think the piece of advice that you gave me was when I need help for something or want advice, just reach out, because back when I was asking if I could ask you for advice or ask you for your opinion on something, I think what you told me was I sounded nervous, or the thought process was oh, I don't want to bother you because you're a professor, you have everything else. But then it's actually, in reality, it's the complete opposite, where you have to ask, or if you don't ask, then you still won't know what you don't know again.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You just have to ask, and you're gonna run into people who are not generous with their time.
Right.
But that's more the exception than the rule. It's just that students tend to think it's the rule, not the exception.
Just to wrap up, for those of you who are listening, if you enjoyed today's episode, feel free to follow us on Instagram at FGLI Podcast, and check out our brand new website that is now up at fglipodcast.wordpress.com. For our other episodes, you can find us on Spotify at the FGLI Podcast. And if you have any topics or anyone you would be interested in listening to, feel free to message us on Instagram. Any parting words for people?
Oh, I'm just going to say the same words again. Think about the things that you're thinking about.
Awesome. Thank you again, Dr. Brisson, for joining us, and hope everyone has a wonderful day.
Absolutely my pleasure. Thank you for this program. This is fantastic.